Hello, this is Thomas Richardson. I'm here today to talk to you about the history of Hallsville. We're now in our 150th year. We're celebrating our sesquicentennial October the 25th, 26th, and 27th. I would like to take a few moments to talk to you about how Hallsville got started, what was here before the town came, and a little bit how they got its name and so forth. Like I said, we're 150 years old, and I'm no expert on it. I wrote a column for the Hallsville paper and the Marshall paper for some 38 years until last November of 2018. I've studied history a lot. I read a lot of newspapers. I took a lot of interest in the centennial we had in 1969, and I've done a lot of research, and I'm using some information that I have gotten from that. Laura Parker was an outstanding historian. I also kind of reviewed the book Dean McDowell on the 150 years of the Hallsville Masonic Lodge, and also several other small books we have. Basically, folks, the first known settlement or community in this area was Fort Crawford. Fort Crawford was east of the town of Hallsville. It wasn't too far from where our cemetery and administration building is. It was down Willow Road, where Branch Street runs into Willow Road. Over in that field, several hundred yards, supposedly there was a fort, and this land grant in this area was owned by W.C. Crawford. He had it certified in 1838, and he had it deeded to him in 1841. And Fort Crawford was out there a fort, and later a school and church. And never were any trading posts or type of stores out there. Fort Crawford was kind of down. It was on the Jones property. It was down near a pond a little bit further south. And the only thing that's ever been left in my lifetime there now is an iron-type cemetery. This was a cemetery at Fort Crawford. Now, folks, there is no historical mark on Fort Crawford because no one ever to this day knows exactly what year it was built or who built it. It's a real mystery. It's always been one. It was really brought up, studied a whole lot in 1969 and back years ago. It hadn't been too much research. I have read a lot of information from C.C. Holloway. He was born here in Hallsville in 1904. He interviewed people that were living when Fort Crawford was still there. They remember there was a little sign of the old fort there in 1880. And also Larry Fant was a very excellent researcher and historian. He was a member of the Historical Commission, as I am too. There are several ideas on Fort Crawford. It could have been built about some of Sam Houston's type, one of some of his forts. He had another fort built, but he never mentioned it, though. It could have been, they said it could have been built by some settlers. There really wasn't that many in 1839. I just don't think it was built that late. There really wasn't that many settlers in the area to build a fort, really. And they say they drove the Indians out of here in 1839. The fort could have been built by Mexican. Mexico owned this land here. This was Mexico till 1845, so it's possible they had an uprising. They were afraid settlers, American settlers would take it over up from down in Nacogdoches. They could have built it in 1822. They have no record. They have checked as far as Mexico City, and they don't have any record or anything like that. W.C. Crawford, whose head right it's in, he deeded 10 acres of land to the Methodist Church, and the Methodist Church was there, and they had a circuit riding preacher preach a sermon out there as early as 1839. He said he gave an interview when he was an old man in 1890 in Shelbyville, and he said that he built several forts in Harrison County prior to in 1833. But their later records show that he didn't come to Texas till 1835. So this is, some people say this was just an old man got his dates mixed up. This is a little hard to believe that he built it then. Now, Larry Fant, he was, like I said, he was a real brilliant historian. He came up with an idea that there was a man named Philip Nolan, came here from Kentucky, and had some 26 men with him, came from Tennessee, and he camped out in this area, and he worked, explored some in this part of the country. He was looking for wild horses. They were capturing these horses and taking them back to Tennessee and Kentucky, and it's possible he had enough men to build it for it. He could have built it sometime in 1800 or 1801, somewhere in there. He came through here. There's proof that he came through East Texas. However, he went on down around Waco, and he got in a fight with some Indians, and he got killed. So there's no record. We don't know if it was that way. So to be honest with you, we don't know who built the fort, but we know there was an old fort there years ago. One reason we kind of doubted Crawford building it, he always called it the old fort. When he deeded the land to the Methodists in 1851, he called it the old fort. It was near the old fort. And it's just hard to imagine him calling it old fort when it'd be less than 20 years old in 1851. So anyway, we know it was built, it was here, and I'm not going to worry about it. We're going to go on and let you know there also was they had a building, a school that went on at Fort Crawford. Actually, my great-grandfather's brother, Dave Dicker, taught there in the 1860s, and they had a school here, and there were a few families lived around there, and they had a building. The Methodist Church met there, and the lodge met there while later on, I'm getting ahead of myself, but they did meet there for a couple of years when Hall was formed. So Fort Crawford stayed there. It actually kept that name probably till the 1880s, more or less, because the Methodist Church stayed out there till around 1880. Well, they had a good building, and they just met out there. But it kind of was the first settled area that had a name to it for how it was formed. The actual forerunner as a community where a lot of people came in was called Ash Springs. Now, where Fort Crawford was a mile or so southwest of Hallsville, the Ash Springs was a mile and a half northeast. If in today's terms, if you go down Young Road, now this is the road east of where the Hallsville High School is, which is Cal Young Road. The Young Road picks up at 450 and goes east. You go down that road about a mile or less, you come to the area where Ash Springs was. Ash Springs was settled in 1843 by John Whitehorn and his wife, Elizabeth Kane Whitehorn. I say Kane because she was of the original Kanes that lived here and still live here. Actually, to be honest, Farrel Kane is head of our sesquicentennial committee, and he was kin to Miss Whitehorn. He's a Kane. He's a descendant of her. Also, John Whitehorn came from England. He came over on a boat, and it almost sank. It was really there been a storm come over here. There was another man that lived in later lived in Ash Spring named John Warder was on that boat. But he came over, he came to Virginia and down to Tennessee, and he met Miss Kane. They got married. He lived up there a number of years. And then what happened, a man that knew him, his son-in-law, named Thomas Sanders, came to Texas. He was a little younger than John Whitehorn. And he fought in the Texas Revolution. Thomas Sanders did. And he came down here and he fought in it, and he was also fought in the Indian War. And he got a half a section of land. He got 320 acres of land they gave him for doing it. And he picked out some land, and he went back to Tennessee. He married John Whitehorn's daughter, Emily, and he told him about this land. He said it's a good place to come settle. So they came back down here, and that's when Whitehorn settled it. And they settled it. Ash Springs got its name from some big springs. There's a big spring out there north of side of the road. And there are actually several springs, but that's where it's got its name from, an underground spring in a real good area. And then also Ash Springs was on the Marshall-Tyler Road. This was the main road that came through from Shreveport to Tyler going west back in the 1850s and 40s and 50s, and it came through, and Whitehorn, he also was a stop. He built a store. He built a room upstairs to it that they had a lodge, and then he built a log house. And of course Sanders did too later, and they started the lodge in 1855. But before that, let me back up. The first thing they went through was the Republic of Texas. When they lived here in 1843 and 44, Texas was a republic. It wasn't a state. Of course, Sam Houston defeated Santa Ana several years before, and they had been waiting, and they finally got Texas became a state in 1845. So it was a state, and it was in Harrison County. And he had a thriving, beginning little community beginning to get started. His people were coming through. The stage ran through here. He had a way station for the stage. It would stop on a Whitehorn store. And he started a post office. They had to send it with us when the stage came. It brought the mail, and he was the first postmaster. It stayed in his store, and as long as the Democrats was in, it was in John Whitehorn's store. Now in 1849, another man came I want to tell you about. He was really instrumental in starting living in Ash Springs and starting Hall. He was Dr. W.A. Smith. He was the first doctor. He was from Virginia, but he lived in Tennessee. He went to doctor school up there and got his medical license. He wasn't a surgeon, but he was a general practitioner doctor. And he came and brought his daddy with him, I think a brother, and his wife. They had 4 kids. He came 1859. He had some money. He had been a doctor. He bought a land. He owned the south side of the road where John Whitehorn and Thomas Sanders and all, they live on the north side. Dr. Smith lived on the south side. He lived on, if I explained to you today where it was, you go to the end of Young Road, you hit Hickey Road. You turn right on Hickey, and right there, that's where Dr. Smith lived. He lives there. He was down south of there, and he built a home called Locust Grove, and he had a plantation. Of course, he had a number of slaves. They had slaves then, and he was good to his slave. They farmed his plantation for him, and he later opened a store, and he built a church down south about where Stevens Road and Highway 80 is. If you know where 80 wasn't there then, but he built a church down there, Missionary Baptist Church. And they went along and they formed a lodge in 1855. They started the Masonic Lodge. Thompson, James Taylor Lodge. He was the first worshipful master, and it was named for James Taylor. And they started the lodge in the top of John Whitehorn's store. He had built them an actual room for that. They started the lodge, and they got Marshall to back them, and they formed it, and they had a number of people. John did. I had another great-grandfather, future would be named Dickard. He was in it, and John Whitehorn wasn't a lodge member, but his son James Edward was, and there were a number of lodge members. They started the Hallsville Lodge, and it was started in 1855, and it was chartered in 1856. And in 1859, another man came that I won't tell you about. He was Welton Farrel. He was a preacher. He came from Marion, Illinois, and he brought his wife and family, and he also had a daughter, and she was a school teacher. He was a school teacher and a preacher and store owner, and he went into business with Dr. Smith, and they started a mercantile store, and they had a store on the south side of the road, on the south side of Hickey and Young Road. They had a store there, and the doctor had the plantation. He also was a community doctor. He took care of anybody's illness. He helped them.